So I want to call this episode "Where the hell have we been?" Since I believe it's been like probably 2 months at least since our last video we put out, our last episode that we put out of this podcast. So where the hell have we been, Mac?
I've been just here in Chicago. We went to we took our trip to Ireland. I think I probably discussed it or mentioned it before. So that was real fun. Um didn't like London though. London was kind of lame. To be fair, I think that was because when we went, so apparently like for whatever reason there's no AC in the majority of like places in the UK, like in London or Ireland we were. They are in like, restaurants and, shopping places, of course, but in actual like houses or apartments or, stuff like that, there's nothing. Because apparently what they say is that, oh, it doesn't actually get that hot here, so it's really not necessary. But of course, the 2 days that we go in London, it was like high 80s. So, and London's like a bitch to get around. It's like you have to, and the tube is so far underground and there's no ventilation down there. They literally like outside of the subways they had signs basically like, hey, if you're going into the tube, make sure you have water on you just in case, like, because it gets super hot down there and if like the train breaks down and you're stuck in there, you'll have water on you. But Dublin and Galway we went to for a day. That was excellent. We loved Galway. Um, but yeah, otherwise just been working on the Avatar video, coming along slow, but getting there, trudging along. How about yourself?
Well, I thought we were gonna lead in with what like happened in between the last episode and now, which was we
Oh, okay.
actually met up in person,
Oh yeah, because we haven't posted that one
released
yet.
that
Yeah,
episode. Yeah,
sorry.
okay. So what happened was me and Mac met up at VidCon in Anaheim, California. He went to VidCon. I didn't go to the convention itself. I went a couple of years ago. I told you it wasn't very good for me. But I flew down there because I'm in California as well. We met up, hung out for a while, got to know each other, recorded an episode about Succession, which we're actually in the same room for once recording, so it's a little bit different. That will be coming out after this episode. And the reason for that is because so we end the trip. We both go back home and fly back home. I edit the podcast and I upload it to YouTube, and I do the thing that I always do, which is I upload it, and then while I'm waiting for it to load, I forget to tell you that it's done and it's uploaded. And so I think like a week goes by, and I'm like, oh shit, I forgot to tell Mac that um, the episode was uploaded. But then I forgot to get back to you for a little while, and a decent amount of chunk of time had passed, and then by that point, I was just kind of curious to be like, is he ever gonna like reach out to me to like, or like, is gonna ask when the podcast is ready or when we're gonna record next? So I decided to just kind of see for a while, like when it would come up again, and it did not actually. It was like 2 months, and then finally I reached out to you and I was like, hey, are we gonna record again sometime?
Yeah, I was like, at first I was like, same. I was like, oh, he's probably just taking some time. He's got some other shit on his plate, and then I didn't hear from you, and I was like, I don't know why I didn't. I should have just checked to see. It's like, oh, maybe I should have just checked to see. Oh, maybe he did upload it. But I was like, oh, I didn't want to interrupt. Maybe he's like got, because you upload a lot more often than I do, so it's like, oh, I probably got caught up with like Sopranos or something. Um, but yeah, and when you texted me, I was like, my first instinct was like, wait, yeah, don't we have the episode? And then I logged on and I was like, oh shit. So it was right there.
So really, it was just a matter of lack of communication on both of our parts. So that's why.
Summer slump, just
Exactly, yeah. So that's why you guys have not gotten the episode in a while, but we'll release these ones back to back, hopefully, so you can get back into the groove of No One's a Critic. But yeah, man, it's been a difficult summer. I'm not gonna lie. It's been fucking incredibly hot. Like I know
hmm
your England trip was hot there, but it's been in the hundreds pretty consistently here in California, and I don't have I don't have air like central air conditioning right now. My unit is broken, and I'm waiting until
Ugh.
the winter to fix it because they gouge the fucking prices in the summer because everyone's so desperate for AC. We have a room air conditioner, like we have the thing that you like it hooks up to the window and it like cools
But
the room
then,
itself.
those like even those like jack up your electric bill. To paying that you can't even win with it.
And it's like it's only for that one room. So in this office, it's fucking hot. I've got the window open right now, so if you hear like a car pass by, that's what it is. But yeah, it's been a difficult summer, and then I think we both have been kind of going through like slumps with our content where we don't really know, or like it's just been kind of difficult to work on stuff. Like I know you've been saying you've been having some trouble with the Avatar video, right?
Yeah, it's like because I'm going through it, and well, it's for good and for bad. On one hand, the show itself, particularly, I'm on book 2 right now, and I'm scripting it, and scripting 2 is so complex in its structuring that it's actually hard to. I'm having trouble trying to figure out how to explain. Like it's so well structured that I'm trying. I almost like can't even put it in like because book 1's pretty straightforward. It's like, oh, we're heading to the Northern Water Tribe, and then everything in between is just kind of like episodic adventures, and then they eventually get to the Water Tribe, and it's like, okay, that's fine. And book 3 to some extent is similar, but book 2 is like they start a narrative thread and then resolve it, and then it goes into another one, but then it also carries like it's actually very like when I was breaking it down, I was surprised. I was like, oh wow, this is like very, very astute. It's book 2. I think book 2, at least in my view, is the best. Um, yeah, but then also it's hard because I'm like going through it and I know how much and I overall my impression of the series is excellent. I really think it is something special. However, I do have a lot of critiques because I'm coming at it from someone who has no nostalgia whatsoever, and I've kind of like beta tested a few of them with like people in my Discord, and or I've even kind of like looked at like people critiquing it on Reddit and some of the stuff that like I agree with, and like some of the fans are like fuck, and like in so many words they're like no, and it's like oh man, this is gonna be, and it's like I'll get over it and I'll write it and I'll take care of it, but it is something where I'm like I need to make sure my critiques are like super clear because people who are going to watch this, these are people who like fucking adore the series. So if I'm going to critique it, I need to make sure that I'm doing my due diligence of I'm not just like because all it takes is like for me to say like one wrong thing and then someone will be like, "Ha, you piece of shit. That's not correct." Yeah.
I feel the same way about Better Call Saul. I'm eventually gonna do a long form video on Better Call Saul 2. It's gonna be called the how Better Call Saul failed, or the failure of Better Call Saul, or something like that.
Hmm.
And it's gonna be about all the negatives, and it's not because there's not positives about Better Call Saul, but we talked about this on our podcast before. There's just so many people saying the show is like perfect and flawless and a masterpiece that it kind of pisses me off.
Yeah.
And the only real like negative backlash I've ever gotten for my content has been my reaction to season 6 of when I was watching it live and posting my reaction afterwards. People like vehemently had a problem with my takes on the series of like I was like, oh yeah, Lalo sucks. This season sucks. The cartel storyline sucks. Jimmy's story arc doesn't go anywhere until the very end of the show. It's a mess. And people were like, no, it's fucking perfect. Like fuck you. So I could see that, and that's the one thing holding me back from really digging into that project. Is just like I know I'm gonna get so many people like talking shit.
Yeah. Well, it's hard because there is sort of like you're going up against certain like that, like for example like with the Shield, like when I made, or even like the Leftovers, when I made the videos on this, um it's coming from a place of the show is, I mean, the shows are popular but they're not like uber popular, like they're not like people are like super passionate about it. And then with Better Call Saul, my analysis was overall very positive. I did have my critiques, but I kind of put them at the front to kind of like, it's like, oh, I'll do all that first and then I'll like get into the good shit. And then True Detective I did, but most people, that's one that most people either aren't like super passionate about or but this is like the first one I feel like I'm talking about something where everyone else is like way more passionate, not necessarily the project, but about the actual like IP, where everyone's like way more passionate about it than I am. So that's why I'm like, I gotta be careful. I gotta make sure all my critiques are like on point. And yeah, even if it's like I'm criticizing it, I need to make sure it's like I'm explaining myself in like a rock solid fashion. Otherwise, people will just tear it apart. Like, you fucking idiot, you piece of shit.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I don't know what it's been about this summer, but I felt like I haven't had a lot of strong desire to like. I haven't had a lot of big like projects I'm super passionate about. I've
Mm-hmm.
been making a video, every week and putting it out there, and I try to do my best on those. But the big kind of long projects like that, like I want to do another one about Mad Men. I'm in the process of rewatching Mad Men now to get ready for that. But
Nice.
even as I'm kind of rewatching, I'm kind of like, I don't know what it is. I'm just in a little bit of a slump right now, where it's like The Wire. I was like so fucking down for that thing, start to finish. And that's another thing that happened in between then and now, which is I finished my big Wire video, 4 hours long. It was a fucking bitch to make. I had copyright issues. It sucked so much. I uploaded all the individual parts as I was done with
Yeah, it's
them,
so stupid.
and it was all fine. None of them had issues. But when I put them all together in the 4 hour thing, it had issues. And rendering a 4 hour long video takes fucking forever. So every
That's
time I would
YouTube,
try to
baby.
fix the copyright issue, yeah, it would take like 2 hours to render and then 2 hours to upload. And so finally what I did was I stuck the whole thing within like a TV, like I put a filter on top of it. I think it looks stupid, but like I couldn't deal with that over and over again.
That's YouTube, baby. Makes no fucking sense.
Oh, YouTube. It's the greatest platform on earth.
Or there are times when I like upload a video and there's like no copyright strikes, but there's an issue with like the music or like rewatched it and I realized it did. Like sometimes YouTube will just won't render it correctly. Like I'll render it fine, but then when I upload it, the for some reason maybe the internet dropped out or YouTube's compressor fucked up, so there'll be sort of like some bad quality in the video and like being like I'm anal about that shit. So I'll just re-upload it and then I'll re-upload it and then it'll be fine, but then it's like, oh, hey, by the way, like the copyright. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah,
You can't do that.
YouTube. There's so many problems with uploading videos and the video quality and the audio quality that I kind of give up. I'm like, if it looks shitty, hopefully just the ideas kind of make up for it. But YouTube, I mean, the whole platform just has so many fucking. There's a bug that's been like for years where I don't know if you ever do this, but sometimes I edit a video so it's exactly like 11 minutes long to the exact point, or 11 minutes and 11
Oh
seconds or something,
yeah,
just
I
so it
hate
looks
that.
right. Yeah, you know what's up. So
Yes.
YouTube will add a second to the end of your video even
Yeah.
though it's not there. So what you have to do is, if you want it to be exactly right, you have to make it slightly before. So if you want it 11 minutes long, you have to make it 10 minutes and 59 seconds and like point whatever, and then that will add up to 11 minutes exactly on the preview. But when you click on the video, it's back to 10:59. So it's really stupid.
My Wire season 5 video is literally 1 hour long. And it's weird because like when I go to the YouTube link of it and I watch it, it said it's an hour exactly. But then on the preview or like in my video details or like my content channel content page, it's an hour and 1 second. I'm like, what the stop? Like that's like really bugging me. I know it shouldn't, but it really is.
Yeah, again, that's one of those things I think like only creators really care about. I doubt most people even like look at the
Oh
length
no,
beyond
they
just
don't
like,
care.
yeah. But I mean, it's still like I try to be cute about it. Like I did a video on The Sopranos, what 9/11 did change, how 9/11 changed The Sopranos, and I made it 9 minutes and 11 seconds long, and I had to like again cut it exactly the right way to make sure that it read 9/11
Nice.
on the final thing.
It's poor YouTube.
I know.
Sometimes I feel like I'm too hard on it, but then I'm like, no, I'm not. Fuck them. They're
I
fine.
mean, they're billion. It's $1 trillion fucking company. So, I mean, I'm not gonna cut them too much slack. But I mean, it's a net positive in our lives that we get to make content and make money from it and have an audience and record hour-long fucking podcasts. We actually hit our hourly goal to get monetized. Like we have like 4,000 watch hours. We just
Mm-hmm.
don't have enough subscribers. So if you're fucking watching this podcast and you're not subscribed, what are you doing?
Get
Like,
on it.
come on, come on, come on.
But no, I feel you about that's sort of how I feel in regard to not so like not like overall in terms of when we're talking about like passion projects, it's like, yeah, there are certain series because even like Better Call Saul or even True Detective, these weren't things that I was like with the leftovers. That was something where I was like, oh yeah, I need to make this. And even the Shield to some extent because they're like, oh, no one's ever done this. But yeah, at some point it's hard because on one hand you're like, well, you need to make consistent content, but then on the other hand, it's like, well, it's if you start doing that, then you start making content on stuff like you really don't care about, and I think that kind of comes across in your content. It's like, am I like really like, so for example, I just made the video in between the Bear Forex because while I was trying to do the Avatar video, I just like I had like this gnawing thing in my head. It's like, oh, I really want to make a video on this, but then like, oh, should I wait? And it's like, nah, fuck, I'll just do it now, and then we'll um you know, go from there. Um, but yeah, it's hard because there's like the give and take where it's like, well, it's work and you want it to be work. You want if it's your career and you want to make money from it. But at the same time, it's like I don't want it to become something where I'm like making videos that I have no interest in actually like. Yeah.
No, that type of content sucks. It's like you gotta have some interest in making it. Like I think there's your audience might have slightly different interests than you do at the time. Like obviously my audience, they love the Sopranos stuff. That's always going to do the best. But I still try to sprinkle in other types of content besides that, just because I think it keeps the channel more interesting and it keeps me more interested. Like I did a Succession video. I knew that wasn't going to get as many views because again, not as many people are into that show as they are the Sopranos. So but it was still, I think, a worthwhile kind of endeavor for me to just be like, yeah, this is something I'm kind of interested in right now. I want to talk about it. Um, we'll get it. I try to do like a one for me, one for them kind of thing where we'll do some kind of experimental, and then we'll kind of go back to like, all right, here's the usual format of what you're used to on this channel.
Yeah, I think maybe it's just because with the whole like writer strike going on and everything, it's just like I there was just the news that Dune Part 2 got pushed back, and I was very upset, along with like pretty much the entire internet, which I'm I'm
Are
glad
you
that
are you
most.
like a Dune fan though, or did you just like the first movie? Like, are you a
I
fan of the book? I mean,
I read it like a while back, but I've always really been really into the like the actual story of it, or just like the whole what's what I'm looking for, like the whole like the lore of it. It's just so nuts, but it's also so brilliant. It's just like it's so hard because like when you're describing it, it almost and I remember I felt this way when I first um like kind of heard this before I even read the book. I sort of heard um the story of Dune about spice and all this stuff. This sounds really stupid, but then you read it or then you watch the movie and you're like, okay, this is pretty cool. Like, okay, I'm getting into it. And then you go even one step beyond, and then you're like, oh wow, this is actually like this is a critique of so many stories that you probably love, like the hero's journey and like, the white savior and like all this stuff. This is like a very harsh critique of these sort of stories. And it's just so it just it's I don't know, especially because what's so frustrating is that there are a lot of people who I think didn't like Dune Part 1 because of the reason that it when you just watch part 1, it does make it seem like it's a story of like this like white kid comes in and saves these desert people. So it does kind of have that white savior, you know, vibe to it. But then you watch the second half of the film or the second half of the book, part two, and you're like, no, it's like way more complicated. And the film knows exactly what it's doing and what it's setting up. So I'm like, please come out so we can talk about it, so we can dive into this shit.
I think there's a lot that's been like delayed and a lot that's been, I think, probably canceled and stuff too at this point. I mean, this strike's been going on for like 3 months now. It's gone on a
Mm,
lot longer than I thought it would. Um, I looked through the list of like canceled and delayed projects, and there wasn't anything I was too upset about that we're not going to get. House of the Dragon, I think, was not affected by the strike. I think they had already kind of finished their season writing or whatever that they're doing, but it's not going to come out
mm.
until like 2024 anyway. So
Yeah, that's what I figured. Like everything was either like already done, or it was too far out where it didn't really, or like it wasn't even on my radar because it was so far out. So I was like, eh.
the only thing I'm curious about is David Chase's new show that he's working on, which we don't even know the name of it yet. But I have to imagine that they were in the process of writing because it got announced in like earlier this year. And obviously that's when the strike happened. So I gotta imagine that has affected. I hope it doesn't get canceled because I would really, really like to see a new show from David Chase, regardless of whether it's good or bad. Like if it's good, like great, it'll be a return to form, a new Sopranos or whatever. If it's not good, then I can still make content out of it and we can critique it or whatever. But I would be really excited to see that, no matter what happens with it.
What is the idea behind the new?
We don't know much. It was only announced that he is working on a show. Apparently, it has something to do with the witness protection program, which people made jokes afterwards that it's like it's Tony and witness protection or whatever, and it's like no, of course not. Um, he's co-creating the show with this like young female writer director who she's done a couple like independent movies. Which I wasn't sure what to think about that or not because I was like, they made it sound like I don't know. The article that I read made it sound like they put her with him because they're like he's a fucking old fart and we need like the young, millennial writing to appeal to a mass audience. So um, I wasn't sure how to feel about that, but I'll save judgment till I actually see the final
Hmm.
thing.
Yes. I actually was just reading um an article, and they were talking about how at one point someone had brought up, or there was whispers of maybe having another season of The Sopranos that would link Many Saints of Newark. So it would basically like fill in the gaps between the 20 years between
Yeah,
Many
yeah,
Saints of
yeah.
Newark, roughly,
Do a
and then
do a do a mini series. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I'd be like, if you fucking dare, like, there's
I
like,
would be down. I don't.
I,
Again, I don't care whether it's good or bad. It's good for me either way. Like if it's
I
bad,
just
that's more content for me, baby.
like here's my thing. This is like what pisses me off, and this is it's very similar to all the Game of Thrones spinoffs that were in the works before that shit the bed. So for example, let's take there was a lot of people who were talking about, hey, you guys should make like a mini series depicting Robert's Rebellion, which is the rebellion leading up to the beginning. Basically, it very leads up to the beginning of the Game of Thrones show, or I mean, 20 years before, but like basically like the events that set off Game of Thrones. Um, and what really like what I don't understand about that is like, would it be interesting? Maybe. Would it be entertaining? Sure. Be like cool to see who they cast and whatnot. But what I would like ask is like, okay, but what are we learning? What would happen? What don't you know about Robert's Rebellion that we would find out in the show? What's kind of cool about House of the Dragon is that it's based off of George R. R. Martin's writing, but it's not really like prose. It's more like historical record. So there's a lot to flesh out there, and there's a lot of stuff that we thought was true or that was depicted in history, um, or like it's like in the book when you just like read the text, you're like, oh, this has happened. But then you see it play out, you're like, oh, actually, no, that's what people thought happened. And I think that's really interesting, where it's like, hey, we can use this to draw a more nuanced picture where like you can actually learn new stuff and see how this war that was like very, it seemed like it was between like two like very um like evil people or like very simple one-dimensional characters, it was actually a lot more complicated. um but then with other stuff, it's like even the Sopranos, it's like what is it that you need to know about that time period that you already don't know?
The point of a prequel is either to recontextualize something or to explain, like how something happened, like how like allow it to make sense. And I think that's my problem with Better Call Saul, which is the same thing. Like, what is the point of this show? What are we trying to get out of it? Now, the point, at least for the first 3 seasons, was here's this character Jimmy McGill who becomes Saul Goodman. This is the side of his personality that you did not see before, and the actions and the choices these characters are making that will kind of lead him to be the Saul Goodman of Breaking Bad. And that was
Yes.
really good and really interesting.
At the beginning of Better Call Saul, we see just how different. You're like, who is this guy? Who is this Jimmy McGill who actually like has a good heart and is actually like a caring, empathetic person? How did he become the scumbag that was? And then of course they paired it with a sequel to Breaking Bad as well, which kind of helps. But yeah, that was a prequel series done right, because it knew that it was like we need to have something other than just like, because we hardly knew anything about Saul's past in Breaking Bad. So
Oh,
that's how
almost
you do
nothing
it
besides
well.
his name.
Yeah.
But that's where the show goes off the rails, which is the second half, which is then it becomes more about like here's just the stuff that happened. Here's Gus building the
Yeah.
super lab. Here's Lalo Salamanca, that guy we referenced that one time, and he dies because of course he dies because all the Salamancas are dead by the timeline of Breaking Bad. Like, and that's I think the problem would have been with the Roberts Rebellion thing, which is we know all the plot details from that thing, and it would again you could maybe recharacterize some of these characters, right? We could learn more about Robert, why he became the kind of drunken, cowardly king he became, or whatever. But if you're just doing like, here's the Battle of the Trident that we already know how it ends, so there's no dramatic tension at all,
Hmm.
then that would be a very poor prequel. And House of the Dragon has that because we know how it ends, but again, like you said, it's more so about the characters and like the deeper truth behind the thing. And they're doing a little bit with like uh the White Walker type stuff. Like they're connecting like the Targaryens had like a prophecy about the Long Night or something. We'll see if they pay that off or not, because they did not pay it off in Game of Thrones. So we'll see if they can somehow deal with it in this show, but I kind of doubt it.
I
Maybe
mean,
we'll get that. Maybe we'll get that in the Jon Snow sequel that we're gonna get apparently with Kit Harington too. So who knows?
I feel like Game of Thrones fell off so badly to the point where it's like when I even think of like when we're talking about like the greatest shows of um um the last like 10 years or so, or even the 20th century 21st century, Game of Thrones just doesn't factor in because it just, and a lot of people like give me shit about that, where they're like, yeah, but it was still good. And it's like, I don't agree. I
It
honestly
depends
think
on how
it's
you
like,
look at it. Like
I
culturally, it was a very important show culturally. Like it grabbed hold of the culture in a way that most shows never do. Like
true, but then
to the point where they're considering making a fucking 100 prequels and sequels because it's gonna make that much fucking
oh,
money.
well, not now. I almost wonder if it's like people are like, actually, maybe I'll watch it. I don't know. Even House of the Dragon. I think part of the only reason House of the Dragon is even people were interested in it is because it was a prequel. Like if there's like I'd probably watch a prequel, a sequel. I'm like, I have no interest in that whatsoever.
I think most people would watch the Jon Snow sequel
Unfortunately, they probably will.
if you promise that it wouldn't. If you promise that David and Dan were not working on it, which they will never work on a Game of Thrones project again,
Yeah.
but if you promise to like, hey guys, It's not going to be like before. I guarantee you, HBO would get a fuck ton of fucking viewers from that.
Yeah, or maybe it's just like a maybe people are hoping that maybe it'll somehow redeem. Oh no, this is part of the story, and it's
Well,
like
people
I
like
don't
to
know.
hate watch too, anyway. So it's like, they'll
True,
watch it for whatever fucking reasons they want. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe when the next Game of Thrones book comes out, if it ever fucking does, there might be a whole new renaissance of interest in the series.
maybe, but it's again, it's like I'm a person who um I'm a person who like completely disagrees with that idea of um when people are like, it's like, oh yeah, but it was still good. It just didn't have it just ended badly, like really badly. And I'm like, for me, it's like, yeah, it's like it's almost
Oh
like
yeah,
telling
no, it,
someone,
it ruins it completely.
yeah. It's like I feel like people look at a TV show as something different. And like to be clear, it's not just like it's not something like Friends, where it's like even if like the last season, oh no, sorry, How I Met Your Mother, that's a good example, where because it's somewhat, well actually no, actually, because
How I
the
Met Your
entire,
Mother's ending does ruin the entire
yeah, I
series.
was gonna say that's a terrible example because the entire premise of the show is
It's
How
like
Does It
The
Meet Your Mother.
Wire. Like the fifth season of The Wire is not as good, but it doesn't ruin the entire show.
That's a good way to put it. You can still you could probably just watch the first four even in isolation, and the season five isn't even like that bad. Um, it's got issues, but it's not like the worst thing ever. Or even Scrubs is another good example where the last season technically is like a cap off season, but like you can just watch the first eight and enjoy it. Even Dexter, I think you can, if you stop watching at season four, it's fine. Um,
I think
but with,
like House, if you ever watch the series House,
yeah,
watch the first 5 seasons and
yep,
then the two part season 6 opening, and stop watching it from
just
there.
stop.
It only goes downhill.
But with Game of Thrones, it's a singular narrative. It's everything that comes before it is dependent. The ending is, it's like the entire point I'm getting invested in this is to see how it all turns out. You can't just stop watching at the end of the second half of season six or something. So yeah, it's like I would never tell someone, hey, you should check out this movie. The last 10 minutes are awful, but everything before that's great. It's like, no, it's a bad movie. If anything, I almost consider it a worse movie for how good it was before and then how much it shit the bed. That's where I feel with Game of Thrones. It makes it, in retrospect, it makes it even worse in my eyes.
And that's why. And I know I keep bringing this up and I keep ragging on Better Call Saul, but that's why I really feel like I need to make like a strong critique of all the problems of Better Call Saul. Because again, I think a lot of people realize some of these problems, but they're just like, yeah, I just like the show anyway. And it's like, I mean, that's fine, but these are real narrative problems that kind of bring down the show. However, I do kind of controversially love the finale of Better Call Saul, which a lot of people did not like. They liked everything else, but they didn't like the final episode. I actually love the final
I,
episode. It's just everything else about season 6 I hate.
I don't know what people want sometimes, man. I hear their critiques and I'm just like, I don't get you. I don't understand like what you value in
Well,
media and whatnot.
because because Saul's a simp. Get it? Because Kim left him and then he took the years for her, so he's a simp, and I hate him.
Yeah, that's unfortunately when you have like immature dude bros try to, and it's funny too because like that's what drives me so nuts about some of those guys where they're like their analysis in general is like really good and they can like be like super astute in terms of the themes, but then when it comes to like an analysis of like a female character they just go like they just their brain, oh, probably the worst is we've talked about this before and another people keep commenting on it on my video on Tony Soprano, the video I did where I talk about how um when the cold cuts when Janice is trying to work on her anger issues and then he antagonizes her. So many people, even to this day, are like, well, no, I actually think in that scene that he was trying to like, he knew like deep down that she hadn't changed. And he was just trying. And it's like, how, like, you can like not like Janice as a character, but how like delusional do you have to be to think that like him being in that scene he was actually doing something. No, he was actually trying to do the right thing. He was trying to help Bobby. Like, are you like Also, it drives me nuts too because it just shows just how little people understand. If you're someone with like anger issues or like anxiety, it's not like you just change overnight. That's about building habits. It's about like if I'm easily triggered or like angered, when I'm in a situation where I'm about to get angry, I have to calm myself. And at the beginning, when you're doing that, it's very difficult. But then as time goes on, it's like meditating. When you first try to start meditating, it's like really, really hard. But then you build up to it. And like, yeah, it's like people like the whole show is about the whole show is about change. And it's like, what do you want Janice to do? To not try to change? I don't know. It's
People
very
commented
weird.
that on when I reviewed that episode, and I said the exact same thing, and I was like, Janice is like trying, she might not be changed, but she's trying to act like a better person, and people were like, well, that means she's fake, so she deserves it or
Oh
whatever.
my
I was like,
God.
no, that's not. You can have shitty thoughts or whatever, or shitty impulses, but if you don't act on them, that's okay, right? Like that's the whole point of being a human being. I have stuff that I should not say out loud. It's not being fake, it's just about being polite and not being toxic. Acting like a good person is being a good person, even if in your mind that's not your first thought, right? Like we're all like that. So, and again, I think that a lot of people, I don't necessarily agree with your statement before where you said that a lot of guys like under like they have like good analysis of the show in general but shitty analysis when it comes to the female characters. I think a lot of people just have shitty analysis of the show in general. Like they don't like fucking get it. Like there's a huge chunk of the audience who like does not understand the show like almost at all. Like they understand like the surface level what you're supposed to almost immediately is know is not the actual case, right? It's like you're supposed to be like impressed by Tony for like a minute when you first watch it and be like, okay, that's kind of cool, but then almost immediately be like, oh no, he's a piece of shit.
Almost, yeah, almost everything he does, save for a few things, is always out of insecurity, and it's always like double handed. Where it, like on the surface, it almost seems like it's a badass moment, but then when you watch a show, it's like, oh no, all this is actually based in like insecurity and oh, he's laying down the law. Like no, he's not. He's insecure. He doesn't like being teased. He's like he's a big baby.
Well, it's same thing too in Mad Men, where it's like people don't understand that the Don Draper persona is not who Don is. He's literally a fake identity that he created to basically fit in with the world, and he's not that person underneath it. And even when he's being that person, he's kind of a piece of shit too, like in like
You
a
know,
very human, awful kind of way. And again, Mad Men's another one of those shows that a lot of people don't understand it at all.
and I think too, it's like I don't mean to like not to pull rank here for you and me, but I think it's like it is a show where it's very similar to like Breaking Bad. Like when I first saw it when I was like younger, it was a whole different show to me than it was now. Now I see Walter White, and again, I don't mean to say like, oh well, if you're young, you just don't understand. But what I mean by that is like as you get older, I think particularly in the case of like Don Draper, when you're like if I'm like a 15-year-old watching Mad Men, all I'm seeing is like all the suits, all the girls, like he's so badass. And of course, like, that's what the show is like. It they make it look cool. Like, that's sort of the point. But then as you get older and you've had relationships and you've, you know, sex isn't this like untouchable thing to you and like all this stuff. And like you've had, relationships work and not work and you've gotten older and you thought about like career and all this stuff, you realize that how just you realize how Don Draper as a person, just he isn't even a person, he's an amalgamation of things that he thinks he should be in this world. And that's why it and again, if you're when you get older, I think again, not to like say like if you're younger you can't understand, but especially as you get older, I think that there is something to be said about like you kind of look back on yourself and you're like, do I have like a personality? Am I a person? Or am I just like are all my behaviors just like almost like calculated? And it's like how do you and I think that's kind of like what the show is a big question of the show, is like, what is a person? Who is this character? And but then again, the question is like, well, is that what a person is? Like, no one ever is like a solid individual. They're almost sort of like a collection of influences and people, and it's like this really weird when it comes to like identity and like who you are. um yeah, I mean, that's the Mad Men I see now. But like, of course, when I'm 15, I'm like, fuck yeah, he's like banging this chick, and that's like,
I I this might be controversial. I'm curious to hear your take on it. I think that Donald Draper might be the most well written, complex character in all of television. And I know that's heresy to some people to be like, that's Tony Soprano, that he's the most. He's a very close second in my mind, but I think what Matt Weiner was just able to take it a little bit further because of his training on The Sopranos, right? He
Mhm.
wrote seasons 5 and 6A and 6B. He learned a lot from David Chase, who talks about this, and I think he was able to just push it a little bit further. And I think Dawn is just like slightly more complex. What are your
I
what are
think
your thoughts on what I just said?
I think that's fair. I probably personally would still go with Tony, but I think it's a situation where it's very similar to, like, Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. When I say Better Call Saul is better than Breaking Bad, when I that is with the caveat that, like, part of the reason it is because Breaking Bad was so much of a test run for a
It's
lot of
standing
the
on the
ideas.
shoulders of giants.
Yes. Whereas Soprano, that's a show where it's like every show is standing on the shoulders of The
Oh yeah,
Sopranos. But
absolutely.
particularly, as you say, because Matthew Weiner worked on The Sopranos for the entire run, he brought a lot of that into Mad Men. Um, no, absolutely. And I think it really goes into it, it, and just kind of like what we were talking about when we're talking about. I think a lot of people seem to think that like good character writing is about like making, and it's hard because it in a way I'm actually contradicting a lot of any of the writing advice I give. But when I think about like what makes a really good character, I think a lot of people think it's like, oh, what are the character traits? Tell me things about them, and that's what make up a character. But more and more, you start to realize that actually what makes a character interesting is the contradictions of the character in many ways. Not to say like, there aren't characters that are, and I love Indiana Jones as a character. But when I'm thinking about, I don't really think he's like that much of a complex character. And that's okay. That's not like a bad thing. Luke Skywalker, I don't really think he's a super complex character. Again, not a bad thing. And in fact, I think, when they tried to make him complex, that's when they ran into a lot of problems. Um, but when you're getting into like, yeah, like Mad Men or Sopranos, like these are shows about like they're doing like really, really deep dives into the character psyches, and the show is really, it's not like like, especially Mad Men, because that's a show where it's all about the characters. Like, I like the plot itself is like completely
There's no
secondary.
plot
Like,
of Mad Men.
there's like basically like no plot. But particularly with Don Draper, because the whole show is, the idea is like we never really get a sense of who Don Draper is. But that's kind of also Don's problem, where he's like, he doesn't really even know who he is, but he's acting a certain way that he thinks he should, but he knows it's bullshit. He's like self-aware that
Well,
he's
he's
tricking.
running away from who
Yeah.
he is, because who he was back in uh, Illinois or wherever he is from is he's the boy in the box, as like that quote goes from when he returns from Korea, like that vulnerable, sexually assaulted boy that he was not who he wanted to be, and thus he invented this new persona where he could be the smooth, suave Donald Draper, and just be strong in life and continue on. And that's one of those things where it's like there's truth in that, right? Like there is valuable advice to Don's philosophy of like just keep moving forward. I don't want to say that that's never the correct thing to do, but the problem with Donald is he just takes it way too far. Like he's not moving, he's not moving on. He's just kind of running ahead. Like that girl. Rachel in the first season, she says it some point blank. It's like, you don't want to run away with me, you just want to run away.
Hmm.
And that's who he is. He's not addressing his problems. He's just running from them and running
Or what
into this
I'm.
fantasy that is advertising, right? That's what he does for a living, is create these illusions and these lies to kind of, sell things. And he is the ultimate ad in that show of like, here is this picture I want to paint of what America, what success looks like, but it's kind of hiding the flaws underneath it.
Hmm. But then the show even questions though but then what is a person? Like, if are you it's like, I think what people say, or it's like, you people say like you aren't what you do. Like, whatever you do, that's not who you are as a person. Or actually, funny enough, I was just in the bar the other day and I overheard the other bartender talking with a dude, and he mentioned that like something that's like interesting with America is one of the main topics of conversation. Um, if you meet someone new in the bar, is what do you do? What's your job? um where he said like when he's overseas, that doesn't really people don't really talk about that shit sometimes, but like it's not really like, but like even if you're like on a date or like just talking, that's always like the main thing.
No, we
and
define ourselves by our jobs in this country.
and then again it's like, but then even aside from that, it's like, well, what are you as opposed to the things you do? It's like, what are you? Don Draper, it's like, are you a family man? It's like, well, he has a family, but then he cheats on his wife. So is deep down, is he really a family man? Yeah, but then, oh, but he's a womanizer. But then, is he though? Because it's like, and it's like this weird, like it's almost like the show. It knows Don so well as a character that we never actually get like a grasp of him. He's like, we kind of know him, but we don't, and it's like that's it's. I think it's purposely done.
Bert
That's
Cooper
what the
has
point of the
this
show is.
line where he says, "A man is whatever room he's in at that moment," and that is a big thing about the show. Is like, who do you choose to be? Who do you present yourself to be?
Hmm.
And ultimately, like, what do you want? And that's like one of the deeper questions. Is they they're pursuing wealth and success, but almost none of them are happy. Like, and what will make them happy? Is it landing a new account? Not really. Is it making an ad? There's a scene where Dawn is asking Peggy, what she wants to do as like as part of her job interview or whatever, and she's describing like, oh, I want to work on this account, I want to work on this ad, and he's like, no, what do you want from life? Like, what is your end thing? And that's, I don't think she knows that, and I don't think he knows, and that's why he's asking. He's trying to figure it out for himself. Like, what do I want out of life? And yeah, Mad Men doesn't present an easy answer for that. Usually, the answer for most shows is like family and connection,
Hmm.
and it kind of is that, because at the end of the show, and I guess I should have said spoilers, but who fucking cares at this point? At the end of the show, he's meditating in this like hippie compound, and he thinks of the Coca-Cola ad, the famous one where they're singing like, "I want to buy the world of Coke,"
Hmm.
and sing in harmony, and that's such an interesting ad to end it on, because that advertisement is a very positive message. It's a message about connection and humanity. And it's one of the first ads that had like people of every color and race, all together. And it's a very positive message, but it's also in service of selling Coca-Cola, right? It's like
Hmm.
it's
It's
it's monetized.
it's a very cutting finale, or like you said, you point out how advertising is all about fantasy. So at the end, when he like, maybe that Don like, oh, but we'll co everyone's in harmony, but like, is the show almost saying like, that's just a pipe dream? And consider it was like the show ends around the timing of like, the Cold War and whatnot. Um, I think that also speaks to the idea of what I love so much about Mad Men is, especially like, I talk a lot about, like the red pill and manosphere and like, conservatism and all that. And what bugs me so much is that so many of these people, they look back on like, post World War II America as if it was like this bastion of that. It was like everything was perfect, and then like, and then Vietnam and the counterculture, not understanding that in many ways the that picture perfect view of America that you thought, that was basically a construction of post World War II America. It was the we won the war and everything's great now and everyone will be happy and the perfect nuclear family. But that didn't it only lasted like what? Like 15, 20 years, not even, and then it started to break down. And it's so like that's what I never understood when people they're like, "Oh, everything was going great until, like feminism and the civil rights movement and the counterculture." And it's like, why do you think that stuff happened? Do you think it just came out of the ether? Like everything was it's I use this metaphor. That's like saying the US housing market was stable in 2007. It's like, "Oh, everything was great." It's like, no, it wasn't great. It may have seemed great. They had this veneer of everything was good, but underneath there was a lot of really bad shit going on, and then it eventually popped.
I wanted to say that like it was perfect for some people, but it wasn't. Like I said, I mean, the show shows it wasn't even perfect for those people
Yeah.
too. It's like
It wasn't.
life is a lot messier than that. And like people are never happy, and we're still figuring out like what do we want out of life, and no one has the answer to that. And I will say, I mean, things probably were better economically for some groups or whatever. Things definitely didn't cost as much back then as they do now, which I would have liked more. But yeah, no, I think that the ending of Mad Men is it's both a love letter to advertisement and a critique, and I think the whole show is like that. Like a lot of shows go into this camp of like, oh, consumerism's bad and like art is pure and it shouldn't be for money. But at the end of the day, they're commercial products. Like a television show is made for money. So they
Yeah.
can't really ever escape this whole like they need to be, popular enough to make a buck too. And I think Mad Men understood that more than a lot of these other pretentious kind of shows that shit on capitalism. That like, no, capitalism is great in a lot of ways. Like again, it can uplift people. You can be rewarded for what you do, like we do on this, fucking podcast that we do, and that's something to appreciate and be celebrative of. It's got problems too. Consumerism has a lot of problems that we are dealing with right now, but there's no kind of one size fits all solution.
Yeah, it seems like everyone whenever they're talking about this stuff, it's like they think it's like one or the other, where they're like big pharma is bad, and it's like or like the pharmaceutical it's like, well, I mean, like there are many parts of the pharmaceutical industry that are an absolute shit show. Our healthcare in this country is nuts, but it also is like been miraculous, and it is a tested. It is a demonstration of like just human ingenuity of just like these viruses that like or like these sicknesses that killed like millions of people, they're like gone, and like that's incredible. But it seems like no one can ever seem to like it's I honestly think like 75% of like our people in the world are like immune to like nuance. Like they're never able to talk about issues with any sort of nuance. It's either everything was great or everything is awful. And it's like, look, come on, we got to be able to talk about these things. You can say like, if I'm talking about, I don't know, like someone like Andrew Tate or something, it's like I could say that like overall I think his message in general is like terrible. It's very hyper consumerist, hyper materialistic. But you can still pick out, okay, let's actually talk about this. Why are people drawn to him? Why are young men drawn to him? But it seems like it's either like all or nothing. It's either like, no, he's like the second coming of Christ, or he's like anyone who like even has ever listened to him or likes him is a fucking piece of shit. And it's like, okay, there's got to be like we need to be able to talk about this like adults.
Well, there's
Um,
stuff about like the men's rights groups or whatever that like I agree with. Like I think there are some negative things that in our society directed towards men. I think there's negative things in our society directed towards women. I think there's and the same thing with like all these different racial privileges and stuff too. Like are there stuff that makes your life easier for being white? Absolutely. Are there stuff that makes your life harder for being white? Absolutely. Are there stuff that makes your life easier for being minority? Yes. So like again, there's this. I agree with you. It's people like to paint this all or nothing picture where I don't think it's helpful dialogue, and I think a lot of people know that, and they're purposefully doing it to like again get attention, to prey on people, like to sell their podcast or sell their books or whatever the fuck they're doing. They want attention and they want to monetize it, and the way to do that is by being extreme.
Or I think a good part of it is just people are just like they're just very passionate about it, and it's like to some extent, like I think a lot most people, or a very large percentage of people, probably most, I think they honestly think that they generally want what is best. They in a way, even if they're like in their head, they think what they're doing is best and that they're actually helping people, even if the advice they're giving is fucking awful, even if they're telling people to like, just do awful, really stupid shit, or like enter relationships that are just like super terrible or behave in ways that are just disgusting. But and I think like that's important because like if because then you end up falling into like, oh, everyone I don't like or disagree with me is like evil, and they're grifters, and they're like they don't actually believe what they say. And it's like, okay, well, we don't want to go that far because then you have to, because like, I mean, like there are plenty of like grifters like in the sphere, of course, but when I'm talking to it's like with those people, I'm not even like interested in talking to them, because if they don't actually believe what they say, then what's the point of even talking to them? But if I'm talking to like, if we're talking about, manosphere, red pill, if I'm talking to a kid who like has fallen for that crap and really believes it, you can't just like, hey, asshole, like just stop it. It's like, no, okay, let's talk about this. Let's actually like try to understand where you're coming from, why you believe what you believe, break it down, and then we can go from there. But yeah, no one wants to do that. They just want to, or maybe people do, and they just feel pressured to be on their in the camps because if they're afraid of being ostracized to the other side. I don't know.
Well, again, I think that if you judge these interactions only based on what you see online, you're only going to get the extreme stuff, because again, that's what comes that's what gets attention. Like you don't the moderate stuff doesn't rise to the top of Twitter, right? Like people don't react to it.
Mm.
And so I think that again, we tend to judge this stuff too much based on what's online versus, or what's in, again, like single tweets and stuff like that, versus having a conversation talk again. I think, like you said, most people, if you actually talk to them, probably have a more moderate view of things, which I tend to think is the right position to have. At least that's what I encounter when I talk to my streams or whatever. Like when you're actually live and stuff, people tend to be kind of more okay, but when they're just leaving comments and stuff like that, that's when they kind of leave the more, because there's no consequences to a lot of this stuff, right? Like you can kind of say whatever you want in certain on certain platforms in certain environments, and like there's not really there's no direct feedback to be like, oh no, what I said was stupid.
Yeah, or like you'll insult somebody, or what did Mike Tyson say? Uh, People have gotten too comfortable. Oh, shit, what was the quote? I think that's a good one.
He said, if you talk shit to me, I'm gonna bite your fucking ear off.
I mean, he will. Social media made y'all way too comfortable with disrespecting people and not getting punched in the face for it. I think to some extent that is true, because especially, and not even like with even if like you'll have two people who are like having like a Twitter war and like you piece of shit, yada yada, but then they'll like go on a podcast and then it'll be much more civil. Because I think just in general, I mean, like not always, but I think in general, it's actually being that person like in real life, like cursing someone out or calling them a piece of shit, is a lot. It takes a lot more gall to do that than just to type it. Like, oh, okay, yeah. Because like, do we really mean it, or is it just typing? Um, Funny enough, I just thought of a scene to go back a bit. We're talking about Mad Men. I just thought of a scene that perfectly encapsulates that divide between Mad Men fans. It's the scene where
I know what you're gonna
uh,
talk about already.
the elevator scene.
I know, yeah, I knew it with
Yeah,
Michael Ginsburg.
yeah. So they're going up in the elevator, and then it's so funny because like it's like, oh, Ginsburg, fuck him, and everything he says about John is 100% correct. But at the very end, they're in the elevator, and it opens, and he goes, "I feel sorry for you," and then Don goes, "I don't think about you at all." And it's always framed as if it's like, yeah, Sigma, man, he like fucking owned him. But every time I see the scene on YouTube, they cut out what happens right after, which is Don says, like, I don't think about you at all. And he leaves like all confident. But then like he goes around the corner and he kind of like has like a breakdown where he he realizes that everything that he said about him was correct, and that like power move that he just did was a complete act of like, he said that not because he actually believes it. This kid probably haunts him, but that was the, I have to, that's the veneer that I have to put out to the world, that I'm this like super confident, indifferent sort of person, when in reality I'm the exact opposite.
Well, then again, though, it's not that there's no value in that, right? You don't have to convey how you actually are feeling at all times. You can put on the persona of being strong and get rewards from it, right? Like, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's how you
That's a good
need
point.
to act sometimes. That you know what you're talking about, and a lot, again, the show showed a lot of times Don just got what he got because he appeared like he knew what he was talking about. There's a great scene where they get high because the doctor like injected them with like steroids and a bunch of uppers and stuff, so they're all like kind of loopy and kind of like hyped up. And Don runs around the corner and he gives this like grand speech to them that's like utter nonsense, and the guys that are high are eating it up. They're like, I would follow you into the depths of hell, like, and then Peggy's just looking at him like, what the fuck is he talking, because she can see through it. She knows at this point that he sometimes is full of shit. But again, that it's not that there's no value to that ever. It's just that a lot of these characters just take it way too far, where
Mm-hmm.
they let it consume them. And again, with Don, it eventually breaks down, right? Where this facade kind of crumbles and he gets almost fired from his own firm because of it. But then he actually does demonstrate, inner strength by like, okay, I'm going to work from the bottom all the way to the top again. I'm going to do the work, like Freddie Rumsen tells him. So again, that's why I think Don is like one of the most complicated character I've ever seen, because it's not that he has no good redeeming qualities at all. He's got a lot of them. It's just that he's got a lot of bad ones to go with it, and they're kind of always in battle together within him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's sort of the thing with everything, where it's like, particularly if we're talking about like Andrew Tate, the Master, one of the big things, and this relates to Don, because he is a very sort of like he tries to put on this facade of like very traditional like masculinity. One thing that always drives me nuts is when guys talk about stoicism, where the thing is that stoicism in and of itself is great. Stoicism is about being able to control your emotions and, like you said, being able to dole them out appropriately. So in like one situation, if you can show your emotion, you can be free. But then another situation, if it rewards you to be more, to like kind of like hide your intentions, or to be not let people know exactly what you're thinking, you're able to control your emotions. The issue is that whenever I see a lot of like young dudes talk about stoicism, they kind of don't think about they don't think about the first part. They just see it as, I can't emote ever. And it's like, that's not what stoicism is. Someone who is stoic is actually someone who is very self-reflective. This is someone who has actually sit with them their who has actually sat with their feelings, understands them, you know, contemplates a lot, actually like understands how they're feeling at any given moment, and they've learned to control their emotions. They don't just, anytime they feel something, they push it away. And unfortunately, that's something that I see a lot, where people, they take could what is a good trait, or what could be a valuable trait, and they just take it in the wrong direction. And that's, I mean, that's, to bring it back, that's basically like Tony Soprano in a nutshell. He's someone who like, he kind of like, again, like he him being insecure about not being seen as a leader to his crew or to his family, that is a good concern. He does have to be a leader. He does have to like command respect. But when he did so by beating the shit out of Perry in front of everyone, it actually did the opposite, where it made him look way, I mean, people, they feared him, but it also made him come off as looking very unstable, which ironically ended up turning a lot of the people in the family against him, because they're like, yeah, I mean, I fear him, like, because he's gonna kick my ass, but like, he isn't someone who commands respect. It feels very, it kind of backfired in a way. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I figure. I think that's we're at our hour here. So you guys can expect this more consistently from us, hopefully moving forward. But we'll have the next also episode that we recorded before this again went live at VidCon. So that'll be coming out shortly after this episode comes out. So check that one out too. We talked about Succession. It was a good episode. And yeah, stay tuned for more episodes of No One's a Critic coming soon.
Take care, y'all.